Mara, this isn't how I imagined we'd end up here.
Then why does it look like you've rehearsed this?
Because I wanted this to be respectful. You keep the house. I'll continue paying support for 3 years. We split the retirement accounts evenly.
I'll have my attorney review it.
Of course. Thank you for making this easier than I expected.
He finally filed.
Did he offer a settlement?
Exactly the one he wanted me to accept.
Good. He's still unaware?
Completely.
Then tomorrow, we introduce him to the part of his marriage he never bothered to learn.
Let's do it. So, you're finally free?
Almost. Almost.
Work?
Probably paperwork. Michael, I'm in the middle of dinner. The company you manage, the company you've worked at for 11 years, the company paying your salary belongs to Mara.
Elliott, what's wrong?
Elliott Cole served his wife with divorce papers on a Tuesday evening in March. He had prepared for this conversation in the way of a man who has been planning something for a long time and believes he has accounted for every variable. He had retained an attorney, he had prepared a settlement offer, and he had arrived at the kitchen table with the specific composure of someone who has already decided how the evening is going to go. He laid out the offer, the house, with the remaining mortgage, monthly support for 3 years, an equal split of the retirement accounts. He told Mara that he hoped they could do this with dignity. He told her that he thought they both deserved a chance at something different. He said these things with the specific warmth of a man who has found the language that makes the thing he is doing sound generous rather than calculated. Mara sat across from him and listened. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She said, "I will have my attorney look at this." Elliott said, "Of course." He believed, in that moment, that the conversation had gone as well as it could have. He believed he was about to exit an 18-year marriage with his financial position intact and his future with Ashley in front of him. He was in the process of making the most expensive mistake of his professional and personal life, and he was too certain to notice. What Elliott did not know on the Tuesday evening in March was that the company paying his salary, the company he had worked at for 11 years, the company whose Atlanta office he managed with the professional pride of a man who considers his career his primary achievement, was owned by his wife. Meridian Design Group, which had been his professional identity for over a decade, was built and owned by Mara Cole through a holding company she had established 15 years ago and which had never been publicly associated with her name. The firm's CEO was Renata James, who appeared in every press mention and attended every industry event, and whose name was on the door. Mara Cole's name was not on the door. It was on the ownership documents, on the tax filings, on the dividend notices. It was on everything that mattered, and nothing that was visible to a man who had spent 11 years walking into the building every morning without understanding that his wife's name was, in the most legally significant sense, above his. Elliott Cole submitted his financial disclosure in the divorce proceedings. His disclosure listed his salary from Meridian Design Group as his primary income. Mara Cole submitted hers. Her disclosure listed 73% ownership of Meridian Design Group through Meridian Holdings, LLC. Elliott's attorney received Mara's disclosure on a Thursday afternoon. He called Jerome Washington at 4:52. The call lasted 11 minutes. Elliott Cole was not in the office when his attorney called him afterward. He was at dinner with Ashley Brooks. By the end of this story, you will understand why Mara Cole structured her ownership the way she did, and what 15 years of invisible financial authority looks like when it finally becomes visible in the middle of a divorce proceeding. You will understand what Elliott Cole's attorney said when Jerome Washington's disclosure arrived. You will understand what happened to Ashley Brooks's employment at Meridian Design Group 30 days after the ownership became a matter of legal record. And you will understand what Mara Cole said to her mother on the phone on the evening the divorce was finalized, and what her mother said back. But before we get to what happened, you need to understand the full weight of what was built, not just Meridian Design Group, everything that made Meridian Design Group possible. And that starts 30 years before the Tuesday evening in March, in Macon, Georgia, with a woman named Carol, and a dry cleaning business that made her husband a success and left her name off everything. 3 things need to be understood before this story can tell you what it is. The first, Mara Cole did not hide her ownership from Elliott as an act of deception in the deliberate, planned sense that deception requires. She built Meridian Design Group and structured it in a holding company for reasons that had everything to do with who her mother was, what her mother had lived through, and the specific instruction her mother had given her at 22. The structure was not designed against Elliott. It was designed for Mara. And the distinction between those 2 things is the thing you need to hold clearly as you hear this story, because both things ended up being true. The structure was not designed to harm Elliott, and when the divorce happened, it changed everything about his position. Mara has said herself that she should have told him. She has said it specifically and without qualification. She also knows that he would not have told her if the situation were reversed. Both of those things are true, and she lives with both of them, and this story is honest enough to hold both, without resolving them into something tidier than they are. The second, there is a woman in this story who is not Mara and not Elliott, and she requires your attention from the beginning if you want to understand the full shape of what happened. Ashley Brooks was Elliott Cole's executive assistant at Meridian Design Group. The affair between them had been running for 14 months before the Tuesday evening in March, when Elliott placed the divorce documents on the kitchen table. 14 months during which Ashley was an employee at the company Mara owned, working directly for the man Mara was married to, in a relationship that violated a company policy that Mara had approved and that Elliott had acknowledged in his own employment agreement. All of this is important, but there is something more specific. 3 months into the affair, a document arrived on Elliott's desk that Ashley processed before it reached him. A dividend notice addressed to Meridian Holdings LLC at Mara Cole's home address. Ashley was an executive assistant who had been at the firm for 18 months. She understood what a holding company was. She understood what a dividend notice meant. The question of what she understood from that document and what she chose to do with that understanding is the question this story cannot fully answer. It is also the most uncomfortable question it asks. Third, the justice in this story does not arrive early. Not in the first 20 minutes, not in the middle section, not when Mara first understands the full extent of what Elliott has been doing. The justice arrives in the final third, through the specific, clean mechanism of a legal process that required full disclosure of all assets and produced, from that disclosure, a settlement that reflected the actual financial landscape of an 18-year marriage, rather than the landscape Elliott had assumed. Getting to that final third requires you to first spend time in the buildup, in the full texture of what Elliott was doing while Mara was running a company he did not know she ran, while Ashley was processing documents on his desk, while Renata was watching something unfold that she had been watching for longer than anyone had been told. The frustration and the betrayal come first. The payoff has to be earned, and it is earned, but you have to get there the right way. Start from the beginning. Start from Carol. Before we go any further into this incredible story, do me a favor. If you love stories about justice, betrayal, revenge, and unexpected plot twists, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, you do not want to miss what comes next on this channel. Drop a like on this video. It helps more than you think. And comment below where you are watching from, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Carol Thomas was born in Macon, Georgia in 1952, and she married Leonard Thomas at 23 and spent the next 30 years doing something that does not have a title because the people who benefit from it have always found it more convenient not to name it. Leonard Thomas opened a dry cleaning business in Macon in 1978 with Carol's labor, Carol's organizational competence, Carol's relationships with the neighborhood customers who became the business's foundation, and a lease that had Leonard's name on it because Carol's name was not considered necessary. The business grew. Carol managed the books. Carol negotiated with the suppliers. Carol hired and trained the employees. Carol identified the location for the second store when the first outgrew its space, and she drove the route every week to confirm that the neighborhood demographics supported the expansion she was recommending, and she prepared the financial case that their banker required. Leonard signed the lease for the second location. His name was on it. Carol's name was not mentioned in the loan documents or the lease or the business license, because that is not how these arrangements worked, and Carol understood that. And she made the arrangement work because Leonard was her husband and the business was their livelihood, and the children needed what the business provided. She does not describe her marriage as unhappy. She describes it as a particular kind of arrangement that her generation of women understood, a structure in which the competence and the credit were separated in a way that had been so thoroughly normalized that most of the women inside it had not fully named it as a problem until they were deep enough in it that naming it would have required dismantling something they had built with their hands. Carol built 30 years of something with Leonard. He opened a third location in 1991 and a fourth in 1997, and the Macon Telegraph ran a feature in 2001 about Leonard Thomas's small business success story, with a photograph of Leonard in front of the original Forsyth Road location. Carol was not in the photograph. She was not mentioned in the article. She was standing at the front counter of the third location when the article ran, doing the Tuesday morning shift review, the way she had done it every Tuesday for 20 years. She read the article on her lunch break. She set it down. She went back to work. She had been doing this long enough that the specific weight of being invisible in the thing you built was something she carried rather than named. She named it to Diana 4 years later, on a Sunday afternoon when Carol was 51 and Mara was 22, and watching her father receive congratulations about the fourth location from a room full of people who did not know who had done the work. Carol took Mara aside in the kitchen. She said, "Come here." Mara followed her away from the living room, and the congratulations and the specific sound of a celebration from which a significant contributor had been excluded without anyone's explicit intention and to no one's visible objection. Carol stood in her own kitchen in Macon, and she said to her 22-year-old daughter, "Whatever you build, Mara, make sure it is yours." She said, "Put your name on it, or put it somewhere they cannot find it. Either way, have something they do not know about, something that stays yours no matter what." She said this in the flat, quiet tone of someone who is not giving advice from abstract principle, but from 30 years of specific, lived experience. She was not warning Mara about Leonard specifically, or about men generally. She was giving Mara an instruction derived from a truth she had learned. The only way you learn truths of that kind, by living inside the situation that made the truth necessary. Mara was 22. She heard it. She filed it in the part of her that files things that are not yet instructions, because the situation they are instructions for has not yet arrived. 7 years later, at 29, in Atlanta, with a freelance client roster that had grown beyond what a solo practice could manage, the situation arrived. She went back to what Carol had said. She built accordingly. Mara Cole graduated from Georgia Tech in 1999 with an architecture degree. She spent 6 years at a mid-size Atlanta design firm. Good years, formative years, the specific education available to a young architect who is paying attention to how the business works as well as how the buildings work. She was good at her work in a way that announced itself not through the obvious expressions of talent, but through the quality of the problems she chose to care about. The gap between design intent and executed reality, the contractor relationship, the client communication, the specific project management competence that determines whether a design that looks beautiful on paper becomes a building that performs as designed. These are not the parts of architecture that get written about. They are the parts that determine whether a project succeeds. She cared about them. She was good at the parts that determined success. By the time she left to build her own practice at 29, she had a reputation that would travel with her as referrals for the first 3 years of the new operation. She incorporated Meridian Design Group in 2005, not under her own name, under Meridian Holdings LLC, a holding company she set up with a business attorney who helped her understand the liability separation and the tax structuring. The holding company meant that the operating entity, Meridian Design Group, was owned by the LLC rather than by Mara Cole directly. For any public-facing purpose, press coverage, vendor relationships, client contracts, the Georgia Secretary of State's website, Meridian Design Group was the entity, and the ownership of that entity by Meridian Holdings LLC was a fact in the legal documents, but not in the public awareness. Mara's personal name did not appear in any of the places where people look for ownership information, unless they were specifically looking for it in the right places. She was not hiding from the world. She was building in the way Carol had described, something that stayed hers. And the structure worked. It had been working for 15 years when the divorce papers arrived. In 2009, 4 years into the firm's existence, and 3 years after Mara met Elliott at an industry event in Atlanta, She brought Renata James on as operational CEO. Renata had been Mara's closest friend since Spelman. They had roomed together, graduated the same year, stayed close across the decade that followed. Renata had an MBA from Howard and a decade of operational management experience. She understood how to run a professional services firm. She also understood the specific nature of the arrangement Mara was asking her to step into. The public face of a firm whose ownership she did not hold. The visible leadership of something whose invisible ownership was the woman she had known since they were 18. Renata agreed because she believed in the business, and because she trusted Mara completely, and because the arrangement allowed her to do the work she was genuinely excellent at, while the ownership remained in the hands of the person who had built the thing. This arrangement had worked. It had been working for 12 years when Ashley Brooks resigned from the firm, and the last phase of the story completed itself. Elliott Cole was recruited to Meridian Design Group in 2012, 7 years after incorporation, by Renata James. He had been at a competing Atlanta firm where his work as a project director was respected, and his reputation in the commercial design and construction community was solid. He was genuinely good at what he did. Mara knew this because she had been watching Atlanta's design and construction professional community for 7 years, and had formed her own assessment of the key talent in it, and Elliott Cole's name appeared consistently and positively in the assessments of people whose opinions she trusted. She told Renata quietly that if the opportunity arose to recruit him, it was worth pursuing. Renata created the opportunity. Elliott accepted the offer. He had been married to Mara for 6 years at that point. He had no idea that the firm where he was going to work was the firm his wife owned. The moment for that conversation had not arrived, and Mara, who had been structuring her professional life with the habit of separation that Carol's instruction had built into her, had not forced it to arrive. This is the part of the story that is most complicated and that requires the most honesty to describe. Mara Cole has been explicit about this in the account she has given. She should have told Elliott about the ownership when he was hired, and the reason she did not was not an active choice to deceive him, but a passive failure to have a conversation she did not know how to have. She understood that Elliott's sense of himself as a professional was real and significant, and she did not know what it would do to his sense of that professional self to learn that his employer was his wife. She had been married to him for 6 years by then, and she knew how he carried his career, with the specific pride of someone for whom professional achievement is primary rather than secondary, and she did not know how to give him that knowledge without changing something she was not sure she wanted to change. So she said nothing, and the years passed, and the undisclosed fact became structural rather than active, and eventually she had been saying nothing for 11 years rather than 6, and the conversation that had been too complicated in 2012 had become something that felt, in 2023, like it had always been a wall rather than a door she had chosen not to open. The marriage between Mara and Elliott Cole was real, in the ways that matter most. They had built a shared life together across 18 years in Atlanta. They had mutual friends and family relationships, and the specific accumulated domestic knowledge of two people who have lived together long enough to know each other's patterns and preferences, and the particular shorthand of a shared history. They had no children, by a mutual decision that both of them had arrived at independently and confirmed together in their early 30s, without grief or ambivalence. They had a home in Buckhead that Mara had decorated with the eye of a professional who understands space, and that had accumulated over the years, the warm clutter of a life being actively lived in it. Mara loved Elliott. She has said this plainly, and has not walked it back or qualified it with what came later. She loved him for most of the 18 years. The love that was present in the first 13 years of the marriage was real, and the difficulty of the last 5, the gradual cooling, the increasing distance, the specific quality of a marriage that is technically functioning while both people are, in the private interior of their respective lives, becoming less present in it. The difficulty of those years does not retroactively make the first 13 something other than what they were. What changed across the last 5 years of the marriage was not any single thing, but the accumulation of small things in the way that accumulations of small things are the most accurate description of how relationships change. Gradually, then evidently, then in a way that the people in the relationship identify only when looking backward from a clear distance. Elliott became more invested in his professional identity and the social world attached to it. Mara had always been invested in the business in ways that she could not fully articulate to Elliott without disclosing more than she had chosen to disclose, which meant that the central thing in her professional life was never a subject of full transparency between them. The gap between what she could say and what she was actually doing created a specific kind of distance that she had learned to manage, but that remained a distance. They had dinner parties and attended industry events and maintained the visible markers of a successful Atlanta couple with demanding careers and an elegant home. They were not unhappy in a dramatic sense. They were present with each other less than they had been, and the reduction in presence had been gradual enough that neither of them had named it as something requiring specific attention until the point at which it had been reduced beyond the level where it could be maintained as a functioning marriage. Ashley Brooks joined Meridian Design Group in the fall of 2021 as executive assistant to Elliott Cole. She had come from a staffing agency with solid references and demonstrated organizational competence. She was 30 years old, well-presented, professionally capable, and had the kind of proactive assistance intelligence, the ability to anticipate what a director needs before he articulates it, that Elliott had found rare in the 2 years since his previous assistant had left the firm. The professional relationship between them was, by the accounts available, genuinely effective. His project management operation ran more smoothly with Ashley's support than it had in the preceding 2 years, and Renata James had noted the improvement in the quarterly operational review she submitted to Mara. Mara had read the notation. She had approved the quarter's operational report without additional comment. She had no specific information, at that point, about Ashley Brooks beyond her name, in an HR document, and the organizational improvement her presence had produced. The affair began in January of 2022. Mara did not know about it until September. What the affair looked like from the outside, which is the only perspective available to this story on that subject, was the specific, managed quality of two people in a professional setting who are in a relationship they have decided needs to be invisible. They were professional with each other in the office, in the way that people are professional when they are working at being professional, rather than simply being it. They were careful in the ways that careful people are careful. Separate arrivals and departures when they were together outside the office, the specific attention to detail of someone managing a situation that requires management. Elliott had become, across the 14 months of the affair, noticeably more invested in his working life than he had previously been. Later evenings, more frequent weekend site visits, the kind of professional engagement that Mara understood, at the time, as the pattern of someone in the busy phase of a demanding project portfolio. She was not wrong about the pattern. She was incomplete in her understanding of what was producing it. That incompleteness resolved in September of 2022, when Renata James called her. In April of 2022, 3 months into the affair, a quarterly dividend notice arrived at Meridian Design Group's offices. It was routed through the general incoming mail and placed on Elliott Cole's desk by the administrative assistant who sorted the morning mail, because the envelope was addressed to Meridian Holdings LLC, and the administrative assistant did not have the specific knowledge of the holding company structure that would have told her to route it directly to Renata's office, where all Meridian Holdings correspondence was supposed to go. Elliott was in a site visit. Ashley Brooks was at her desk outside his office. She picked up the document when she came into the office to prepare for the afternoon schedule. The document was a quarterly dividend notice. It was addressed to Meridian Holdings LLC. The registered address of Meridian Holdings LLC was a residential address in Buckhead, Mara Cole's home address. The dividend was from Meridian Design Group to its parent entity. Ashley Brooks was an executive assistant who had been working at Meridian Design Group for 18 months. She understood what a holding company was. She understood what a dividend notice meant. She had been working at Meridian long enough to know the ownership structure in the way that a capable assistant learns the operational landscape of the firm she supports, not from being told directly, but from the documents she processes, the conversations she manages, the specific organizational awareness that builds up over time in someone doing her job correctly. She held the dividend notice. She read it. She placed it in the internal routing envelope for Renata James's office, which is where it should have gone in the first place, and she labeled it accordingly and left it in the outgoing internal mail. Elliott found the routing slip when he returned from the site visit. He looked at it. He did not ask about it. He did not know what a Meridian Holdings dividend notice was. He had never had reason to think about what Meridian Holdings was. He set the routing slip in the completed items tray and went to his afternoon meetings. The document made its way to Renata. Renata processed it. The quarter's dividend was confirmed. No one said anything to Elliott about what the document was or who had sent it. The question that this document creates, what Ashley understood from it, and what she chose to do with that understanding, and whether the choice was conscious or coincidental or something in between, is the question that cannot be answered from the information available. There are 3 possible pictures, and each of them is different. In the first, Ashley did not understand the significance of what she held, filed it correctly, and moved on without further thought. In the second, Ashley understood the significance partially, filed it, and chose not to pursue the understanding further because the implications were uncomfortable. In the third, Ashley understood what the document meant, that her boyfriend's employer was owned by his wife, and chose to continue both the affair and the employment with that knowledge, for reasons that are not public. None of these 3 pictures is flattering. They are different degrees of uncomfortable, and the difference matters if you are the kind of person who wants to understand the full texture of what happened here, rather than the simplified version. Ashley has not spoken publicly about this. She resigned from Meridian Design Group 27 days after the ownership disclosure. She took with her whatever she knew, and the knowing has not been shared. Renata James told Mara Cole about the affair in September of 2022, 9 months after it had begun. She had known for approximately 3 months before she said anything. Not because she was withholding deliberately, but because she was spending those 3 months deciding whether what she had observed rose to the level of certainty that justified the conversation she was going to have with her closest friend and her employer. Renata understands, as any competent CEO must, that the organizational knowledge she holds about the people in her firm is a specific kind of power that requires careful use. She had been in professional environments long enough to understand the difference between noticing something and knowing something and acting on something, and she had been watching Elliott and Ashley long enough to move from noticing to knowing before she acted. She called Mara on a Wednesday evening in September. She said, "There is something happening at the firm that I think you need to know about." She said it in the professional tone she used for every difficult conversation she had in her role. Not cold, not soft, precisely calibrated to the gravity of the information and the relationship across which it was being delivered. Mara listened to what Renata told her without interruption. When Renata finished, Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked one question. "How long?" Renata said, "I believe since the beginning of the year. That was 9 months." Mara did not ask how Renata knew. She trusted the quality of Renata's organizational knowledge the way she had trusted it for 12 years, which was completely. She said, "Thank you." She said, "I need some time to think about what I am going to do." Renata said, "Of course." She said, "I am here for whatever you need." She said it and meant it in the specific, weighted way of someone who has been a friend for 30 years and is now in a professional and personal situation simultaneously. Mara said goodnight. She called Renata 3 days later and said, "I am not going to say anything yet." She said, "I need to understand my options before I move." Renata said, "I understand." She said, "Do you want me to do anything differently at the firm?" Mara said, "No." She said, "Keep running it the way you have been running it." Renata said, "Yes." And the firm continued operating as it had been operating. And Mara spent 6 months watching and thinking and deciding. The 6 months between September of 2022 and March of 2023, when Elliott served the papers, were the longest 6 months of Mara Cole's professional life. And that is a statement that requires you to understand what she was managing during them. She was managing her continued professional operations at Meridian, reviewing the quarterly reports, approving the budget items, making the ownership-level decisions that Renata escalated to her through the regular process. She was managing her social life with Elliott, which meant continuing to be present in their shared life in the way that she had been present in it, because she had made the decision that she was not going to confront him until she understood what she was going to do and what outcome she was working toward. And she was doing all of this while running a company, maintaining a marriage she knew was ending, and carrying the knowledge of what that ending was going to reveal about the landscape of the life they had built. She has said, in the one account she has given of this period, that the 6 months were not about strategy in the way that people sometimes interpret them when they hear about the outcome. She was not sitting down and planning how to engineer a situation in which Elliott would be maximally disadvantaged by the disclosure of her ownership. She was doing something harder and quieter than that. She was figuring out what she actually wanted and what she was willing to live with, and what kind of woman she intended to be in the process of ending something she had spent 18 years building. She wanted to handle the dissolution of her marriage with integrity. She wanted the settlement to be fair, which meant accurate, which meant fully disclosed. She also wanted to protect what she had built, which meant Meridian Holdings, which meant the firm, which meant the 15 years of work that had her name on it, in the places where names that matter go. She was not in conflict about any of these things. She simply needed the time to arrive at all of them clearly. By January of 2023, she was clear. In March, Elliott served the papers before she had made a move of her own, and she received them with the calm of someone who has already arrived at the place the other person thinks they are surprising her with. In December of 2022, 3 months after Renata told Mara about the affair, and 3 months before Elliott served the divorce papers, Ashley Brooks's annual performance review came through the Meridian Design Group HR system. Elliott had submitted it. The review rated Ashley outstanding across all evaluation categories. Elliott had recommended her for a merit increase. The recommendation moved through the HR system to Renata James's approval queue as CEO, and from Renata's queue to Mara's ownership level review as one of the merit increases at the professional staff level. The process was the same as it was for every merit increase at Meridian. The organizational process was not sensitive to the personal circumstances of any individual recommendation. Mara reviewed the merit increase for Ashley Brooks on a Wednesday afternoon. She approved it. She did not add a comment. She did not flag the request. She processed it with the same professional attention she brought to every operational matter that crossed her desk. The merit increase was confirmed. Ashley Brooks received a raise, authorized by the woman whose husband she was in an affair with, effective January 1st of 2023. The HR system generated the confirmation notice. No one found this remarkable at the time, because no one in the HR system knew the full picture. Mara knew the full picture. She approved the raise anyway, without comment, with the specific composure of someone managing something whose management requires precision rather than emotion. She has been asked about the merit increase in the account she gave, and she has addressed it directly. She said, "The merit increase was a professional matter. The review was accurate. Ashley was performing her job at the level Elliott had described. I am not in the business of using the firm's compensation structure to address my personal situation." She said, "That would have been using the ownership of the company for the wrong reason." She said, "I approved the increase because the increase was warranted, because the policy required an accurate evaluation, and because I was not going to contaminate the firm's processes with my marriage." She paused. She said, "There was also something in approving it that I needed to sit with." She said, "I had to be the person who could sign off on something difficult and do it cleanly." She said, "I did not know, at the time, whether I would be capable of that." She said, "I found out I was." She said it in the tone of someone who discovered something about herself in a moment of difficulty and is reporting it with more interest than pride, the way you report a finding rather than a victory. The merit increase was approved. January arrived, February arrived, March arrived. Elliott came to the kitchen table with his folder. The settlement documents Elliott had prepared, with the help of his attorney Gerald Finch, were a coherent offer from the perspective of a man who believed he understood the financial landscape of his marriage. The house was in both their names, with a mortgage that had 9 years remaining. Monthly support for 3 years at a figure that would, in Elliott's assessment, provide Mara with a transitional period sufficient to establish independent income. He described this to Gerald as generous, and from within the landscape he believed he was working with, it was a reasonable description. The retirement accounts were to be split equally, which is what Georgia's equitable distribution standard generally produces in the absence of compelling contrary factors. Elliott had listed his income from Meridian Design Group as his primary financial asset. He had listed the home's equity, the retirement balances, and a modest personal investment account. He had prepared the disclosure carefully. He had been honest about what he disclosed. He simply had not known about a significant portion of the actual asset picture, because that portion had never been disclosed to him. He placed the documents on the table. He walked Mara through each item with the organized, professional manner he brought to every presentation, the same competence he brought to the client reviews at Meridian, the same structured clarity. He met her eyes when he said, "I hope we can do this with dignity, Mara." He met her eyes when he said, "I think we both deserve something different." He was not performing warmth he did not feel. He believed what he was saying. He believed the settlement was fair. He believed he had done the work of preparing this correctly, and in the specific narrow sense of a man who had prepared an accurate disclosure of the assets he knew about, he had. He simply had not known about the most significant asset in the picture, and the person who did know about it was sitting across from him at their kitchen table, looking at his documents with the unhurried attention of someone who has already read the draft and identified the items requiring response. Mara did not correct him, not that evening. She looked at the documents. She noted the retirement account figures, which she knew more about than he understood she did, because the firm's retirement plan was one of the accounts funded through Meridian Holdings distributions, and she had access to the complete plan picture. She noted the income figure, which was Elliott's Meridian salary, and which was, in the context of the actual asset landscape, a small fraction of what the disclosure would eventually reflect. She noted the absence of the most significant thing, the absence of any mention of Meridian Holdings, of the firm's valuation, of her ownership stake. Its absence was not surprising. He did not know it existed. She said, "Let me have my attorney look at this." He said, "Of course." She said goodnight. After he had gone to the bedroom, she sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes longer, with the documents in front of her. Then she picked up her phone and called Jerome Washington. Jerome Washington answered at 9:45. He had been expecting the call, in the general sense of someone who has been told a situation may be developing and has been paying attention to the signs. Mara said, "Jerome," he said. "Mara," she said. "Elliott served me tonight," he said. "I am sorry," she said. "Thank you." Then she said, "Before we talk about the response, I need to tell you something about the settlement he is proposing." Jerome said, "Go ahead," she said. Elliott listed his salary from Meridian Design Group as his primary income in the disclosure. Jerome said, "Yes," she said. "Meridian Design Group is mine, through Meridian Holdings." Jerome was quiet. Not a polite pause quiet, a genuinely absorbing information quiet. Then he said, "Diana." He caught himself. He said, "Mara." He said it in the specific tone of a man who has been practicing law for 25 years and is genuinely surprised by something, which had not happened to him as often in those 25 years, as you might expect. She said, "Yes." He said, "All right." He said, "I need 2 days with the documents and the ownership structure before we talk about how to proceed." She said, "Take what you need." He took 2 days. Jerome Washington's 2 days were among the more consequential 2 days of document review in his career, and he has described them with the professional understatement of someone who understands that the significance of what he found was not in the complexity. The ownership structure was straightforward. The documentation was complete. The legal situation was clear, but in the scale of the disclosure's implications for the settlement proceedings. The 73% ownership stake in a 36-person professional services firm with 15 years of operation and a revenue base in the 8-figure range was not a minor asset. It was the dominant asset in the marital estate by a considerable margin. The retirement accounts, the home equity, the personal investment account, these were real assets, and they were meaningful. But they were meaningful the way the visible tenth of an iceberg is meaningful, when the context includes the 9/10ths below the surface. Jerome called Mara on Thursday morning at 9. He said, "Are you prepared for what the disclosure is going to produce?" Mara said, "I have been building toward it for a long time." Jerome said, "Then let's begin." The 6 weeks between the Tuesday evening in March and the formal submission of Mara's financial disclosure were, from Elliott's perspective, a divorce proceeding unfolding in the expected way. He was at Meridian, managing his project portfolio, navigating the professional routine of a senior director at the firm he had worked at for 11 years, with the familiar ease of someone for whom the work environment has become as natural as any other daily space. He was processing the end of a marriage that he believed he had managed correctly. The paperwork was in order. The attorney was competent. The settlement offer had been received by Mara without visible objection. He was planning his next chapter. He and Ashley were at dinner on the Thursday evening when Gerald Finch called and did not reach him. He had his phone face down on the restaurant table. The call went to voicemail. He did not listen to the voicemail until he was in the car, driving home, at 10:15. Gerald Finch's message said, "Please call me as soon as you are available. It is important." Elliott called back in the parking structure beneath his building. Gerald answered on the first ring. He said, "Where are you?" Elliott said, "My building." Gerald said, "Sit in the car. Do not go upstairs yet. I need to tell you something." Gerald Finch has not spoken publicly about the conversation he had with Elliott in the parking structure. What can be reconstructed from the subsequent legal proceedings is that Gerald conveyed the substance of Mara's disclosure, that his client's wife was the 73% majority owner of Meridian Design Group through Meridian Holdings LLC, that this ownership had been established 15 years prior, that the holding company had been the legal vehicle through which the operating company was owned, and that the salary Elliott had listed as his primary income in his financial disclosure had been paid from a company that was, for legal purposes, owned by the woman he was divorcing. Elliott requested independent verification of the disclosure. Gerald said he had already verified it through the state records. Elliott requested a second verification. Gerald provided it. The ownership of Meridian Design Group through Meridian Holdings LLC in the name of Mara Cole was accurate and complete and documented and irrefutable. The company he had been managing a significant division of for 11 years was his wife's company. He was her employee. He had been her employee for 11 years. He had walked into her building every morning for 11 years and had been thanking Renata James for the professional opportunity at the company holiday party every year for 11 years. And Renata James had been smiling and saying it was her pleasure and texting Mara afterward. Elliott Cole sat in a parking structure in Atlanta and absorbed information that required him to rebuild his understanding of the last 11 years of his professional life. Not rebuild from scratch. The work he had done was real. The projects he had managed were real. The relationships he had built in the Atlanta design and construction community were real. But the architecture of the situation within which he had been doing all of that real work, the assumption that the firm was Renata James's firm, that his employment was Renata James's professional decision, that his career at Meridian was a separate domain from his marriage, one of the domains in his life where he was the one holding the authority and making the decisions and building the achievement, that architecture had been incorrect. He had been working in a structure whose foundation he had never looked at directly. He had been thanking the wrong person. For 11 years, he had not known who to thank, because the person he would have needed to thank was sitting across from him at the kitchen table and had not told him, and he had not asked. The affair between Elliott Cole and Ashley Brooks was 14 months old when Elliott served Mara with the divorce papers. 14 months is long enough to be a sustained choice rather than an incident. Long enough for two people to have arrived at a set of decisions about what the relationship was, where it was going, and what they were each willing to do about the life they were already living. Elliott had decided somewhere in those 14 months that the relationship with Ashley was the thing he wanted to continue, and that the marriage to Mara was the thing he was willing to give up in order to continue it. He had made this decision with the confidence of someone who believed he had surveyed the landscape correctly, who believed that Mara's position in the divorce would be the position of a woman without independent professional income, that the settlement he proposed was fair to someone in that position, and that his exit from the marriage would leave him financially stable and professionally intact. He was wrong about all three elements of this assessment. He had made the assessment on incomplete information. The incomplete information was the thing Mara had not told him, and the thing he had never asked about, and the thing that the divorce proceedings would reveal with the specific, irrevocable clarity of a legal document submitted under oath. What Ashley Brooks knew about this landscape, or did not know, or partially knew and chose not to fully process, circles back to the document in April of 2022, and the question it raises that this story cannot answer. What is known is that Ashley continued her employment at Meridian Design Group for the full 14 months of the affair, through the discovery of the affair by Renata in September of 2022, through the approval of her merit increase in December of 2022, through the serving of the divorce papers in March of 2023, through the legal proceedings that followed, and through the disclosure of Mara's ownership that made the full picture visible to everyone in the story who had not previously had it. She was working at Meridian Design Group, drawing a salary authorized by Mara Cole for the entire period during which the affair was running. This is a fact. What it means is the question that belongs to Ashley, and she has not answered it publicly. Renata James, who knew about the affair from September of 2022, continued to operate Meridian in the same professional manner she had operated it for 12 years throughout the period of the divorce proceedings. She had told Mara what she knew when she believed Mara needed to know it. She did not tell Elliott that his employer was his wife. She did not tell Ashley that the firm's owner was the woman her boyfriend was leaving. She managed the firm's operations. She submitted the quarterly reports. She attended the client presentations. She sent the industry publications the press releases about the Charlotte expansion that Mara was planning. She smiled at Elliott at the firm's events with the specific, professional warmth of a CEO managing a complex situation correctly. She texted Mara afterward. Renata James has said, in the one account she has given of the 11 years during which she was the public face of Mara's company, while Mara's husband was one of its employees, it was not my information to share. She said, I told Mara what I knew when she needed to know it. She said, everything else was above my pay grade. She said it and then paused and smiled slightly. She said, or rather, it was above the pay grade of the role I occupy. The actual pay grade is Mara's. Across the 14 months of the affair and the 11 years of his employment at Meridian, Elliott Cole believed he was building two things simultaneously, a career and a future. The career was at Meridian, where his project director portfolio had grown across 11 years into a substantial body of work in the Atlanta commercial design market. Real projects, real relationships, real professional achievement, built through real competence and real effort. He had earned the reputation he had at the firm. He had done the work. He had built the client relationships and managed the construction processes and delivered the projects. The professional identity he had developed at Meridian was genuine. None of that was invented. None of it was the product of something other than his actual skill and sustained effort across 11 years. The error was not in the achievement. The error was in the understanding of whose architecture the achievement had been built within. The future he believed he was building, with Ashley, beyond the marriage, in the next chapter that he had served the papers to begin, was built on a foundation that included the assumption that Meridian would continue as his professional home, that his income would remain as he had presented it, and that the financial position he had outlined in the settlement would accurately reflect the landscape he was navigating. Every one of these assumptions was wrong, but they were wrong in ways that would only become fully visible through the legal process he had initiated. He had not set out to take more than his fair share. He had presented what he knew. He simply had not known enough, and the gap between what he knew and what the full picture was the gap that the disclosure was going to close with the specific, irrevocable completeness of a legal document submitted under oath by a woman who had been building her ownership for 15 years and who disclosed it fully and accurately when the law required her to. Jerome Washington submitted Mara Cole's financial disclosure on a Thursday, 4 weeks after the Tuesday evening when Elliott had placed his documents on the table. The submission was complete, organized, and formatted with the specific professional thoroughness of a 25-year attorney who understands that the quality of a document reflects the quality of the case it represents. The 73% ownership stake in Meridian Design Group through Meridian Holdings LLC appeared on page 3, in the section for business interests. It was supported by the holding company's formation documents, the operating company's most recent audited financial statements, the ownership transfer records establishing the original capitalization, and Jerome's own professional certification that the disclosures were accurate and complete. Gerald Finch received the disclosure package at 3:40 on a Thursday afternoon. He read page 3. He read it again. He called Jerome Washington at 4:52. Jerome answered. Gerald asked for a clarification on the Meridian Holdings item. Jerome confirmed it was accurate and complete. Gerald asked, the firm that employs Marcus. He caught himself. He said, the firm that employs Elliott Cole? Jerome said, yes. Gerald was quiet. Jerome has said he counted 11 seconds. Then Gerald said, I need to speak with my client. Jerome said, of course. Take whatever time you need. The call ended. Jerome sat in his office for a moment. He called Mara. He said, it landed. Mara said, how did he sound? Jerome said, surprised. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is there anything I need to do right now? He said, no. He said, Gerald will need a few days before we hear from him. She said, okay. He said, are you all right? She said, I have been working toward this moment for a long time. The working is done. Jerome said goodnight. Mara sat in her home office in Buckhead, the office where she reviewed the quarterly reports and the ownership filings and the expansion plans, and she was still for a while. not paralyzed, not dramatically at peace, simply present with the moment that 15 years of building and 18 years of marriage and 9 months of knowing and 6 months of deciding had produced. She had been careful. She had been honest. She had disclosed fully and accurately as the law required and as her sense of how to conduct herself required. The outcome now belonged to the legal process, which would be as thorough and fair as Jerome Washington could make it. She went to the kitchen and made tea and went to bed. In the parking structure of a building across Atlanta, Elliott Cole was sitting in his car, trying to reconstruct 11 years. The 2 weeks of settlement negotiation that followed the disclosure were the most consequential legal conversations in a case that had changed character entirely from the moment the disclosure arrived. Gerald Finch was a competent family law attorney working with a client whose position had shifted under him like ground that had turned out not to be solid. He approached the renegotiation with the professional composure of someone who has been through enough contested divorce proceedings to understand that the most effective thing available to him was to work toward the best possible outcome for his client within the actual landscape rather than the assumed one. He and Jerome worked through the items methodically. The house, mortgage-free, went to Mara, the actual equity in the property, freed from the mortgage that had been the complication in Elliott's original offer. The retirement accounts were distributed equitably, based on an accurate accounting that reflected the firm's contribution to those accounts through the ownership structure. The support arrangement was adjusted to reflect the actual financial picture, and the business valuation, the 73% ownership stake in a firm with 15 years of operation and an 8-figure revenue base, was accounted for in the settlement as the dominant asset it was. Elliott's position in the negotiation was the position of a man who had walked into a proceeding believing he was the financially stronger party and had discovered, through the disclosure process, that the stronger party was not him and had never been him. He was not without assets. He had real financial interests and a genuine contribution to the marriage, and the settlement reflected both of those things. The equitable distribution standard that Georgia applies does not produce outcomes designed to penalize or to reward, only to be accurate about what was built and what belongs to whom. What the settlement produced was accuracy. The accuracy happened to look very different from the offer Elliott had placed on the kitchen table in March, because the offer had been based on an inaccurate picture of the landscape. Accuracy replaced the inaccuracy. Elliott Cole signed the settlement documents in October of 2023, 7 months after the Tuesday evening in March. He signed them in Gerald Finch's office. Gerald Finch has not described the conversation. Jerome Washington has said only that the outcome was appropriate given the full picture. Mara signed her copies in Jerome's office the same afternoon. She drove home. She called Carol. The disclosure of Mara's ownership made one additional matter visible that had been an operational concern since Renata had first brought the affair to Mara's attention in September of 2022. The conduct issue at the firm. Elliott Cole's employment agreement, signed when he joined Meridian in 2012, included the firm's professional conduct policy, which explicitly prohibited intimate relationships between employees in direct supervisory relationships. The policy had been approved by Mara as part of the firm's HR framework and had been a standard provision of all employment agreements since the firm's early years. It was not an unusual policy. It is a standard provision in professional services firms for the specific reason that supervisory relationships and romantic relationships are fundamentally incompatible in ways that create risk for the firm and unfairness to the parties involved. Elliott had acknowledged the policy in writing in 2012. Ashley Brooks had acknowledged a comparable provision in her employment agreement in 2021. Both acknowledgments were in the Meridian HR files. Jerome Washington had copies of both. Renata James conducted a formal review of the conduct matter in October of 2023, following the settlement proceedings and with the full awareness of all parties of the ownership structure. The review was conducted with the standard process the firm applied to employee conduct matters. The matter was documented, the policy citation was identified, the relevant employee was given the opportunity to respond through counsel. Gerald Finch submitted a response on Elliott's behalf. The review produced a finding that the conduct had violated the firm's policy. Elliott Cole submitted his resignation from Meridian Design Group in January of 2024, 3 months after the divorce was finalized. He had been a project director at the firm for 11 years. The resignation was accepted through the standard HR process. Renata sent the company-wide departure notification. Mara received it. She read it. She did not add a comment. She filed it in the category of things that were now complete. Ashley Brooks submitted her resignation letter 27 days after Mara Cole's ownership of Meridian Design Group became a matter of legal record in the divorce proceedings. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. It expressed gratitude for the professional opportunity, gave the standard 2 weeks notice, and offered no elaboration of reason. It was submitted through the HR system and routed to Renata's office. Renata processed it. The offboarding proceeded as it proceeded for any departing employee. Ashley's last day at Meridian Design Group was a Friday. Renata sent the standard departure notification. Mara received it. She read it. She did not add a comment. She filed it the same way she had filed the merit increase approval in December of 2022, in the same category of professional matters processed with the same professional attention, without the injection of the personal situation into the operational process. That had been her standard throughout. It remained her standard at the end. The question of the dividend notice, of what Ashley knew and chose and understood and decided, remains the question this story cannot answer. Mara has addressed it in the account she has given, and her account is the most honest available version of what the question actually produces. She said she sat with it. She said she does not have an answer she is certain of. She said she is not in the business of reaching conclusions about another person's intentions without evidence that establishes those intentions, and that the evidence available to her on this specific question is ambiguous. She said, "What Ashley knew or did not know about my ownership of Meridian does not change what Elliott did. She said, it does not change what I built. She said, it does not change the outcome. She said, I have thought about it and I continue to sit with it, and I have decided to be comfortable with not being certain." She said this last sentence in the specific tone of someone who has arrived at a position through real work rather than through convenience. She is sitting with it. She is comfortable with not being certain. She has moved forward anyway. Meridian Design Group announced in March of 2024 that it was expanding its Atlanta operations with a new office in Charlotte, North Carolina. The announcement was made by Renata James at a press event that was covered by the Atlanta Business Chronicle, which ran a feature under the headline, "Meridian Design Group Charts Bold Growth Under CEO Renata James." Mara Cole's name did not appear in the article. It had not appeared in any article about Meridian Design Group in 15 years. The firm's ownership structure was not public information and had not been required to become public information through the divorce proceedings in any way that affected the standard operations of the firm. The Charlotte office hired 17 people in its first 4 months. The project portfolio in Charlotte included a commercial development that had been in Elliott Cole's Atlanta project roster before his departure, and that had transferred to a new project director when he resigned. The project was progressing on schedule under the new director. The firm was intact. The expansion was proceeding as planned. Mara Cole called her mother on the Tuesday evening in November, when the divorce was finalized. She called from the car in the parking structure beneath Jerome Washington's building, before she started the engine to drive home. Carol answered on the second ring. Mara said, "Mom, the divorce is final." Carol said, "How are you?" Mara said, "I am okay." She said, "I need to tell you something." She said, "Do you remember what you told me when I was 22? Carol said, "About building something of your own?" Mara said, "Yes." She said, "I took it literally." She said, "I built a design firm." She said, 36 people, 15 years. She said, "I own 73% of it through a holding company." She said, "Elliott worked there for 11 years. He did not know." Carol was quiet on the other end of the phone. The quiet lasted long enough that Mara said, "Mom?" Carol said, "I am here." She was quiet again for a moment longer. Then she said, "Diana." She caught herself. She said, "Mara." She said it in the specific tone of a mother absorbing something significant. Then she said, "Your grandmother would have thought that was perfect." She said it in the quiet, warm, complicated tone of a woman who spent 30 years building something with her name off it, who told her daughter to do it differently, and who is now learning that her daughter did it differently in a way she had not quite imagined when she gave the instruction. Carol had told Mara to put her name on it, or put it somewhere they could not find it. Mara had put it somewhere they could not find it. And when the moment came that required the name to be visible, when the legal process of the divorce required full and accurate disclosure of all assets, the name had appeared exactly where it needed to appear, in exactly the form that made it irrefutable and complete. Carol said, "I told you to have something of your own." She said, "I did not tell you it had to be small." She said, "I am proud of you." She said it in the specific way that mothers say things they mean completely. Mara sat in the parking structure and held the phone and said, "Thank you." She said, "I learned from you." Carol said, "You learned faster than I did." She said it without bitterness, without grief, with the specific warmth of someone who is seeing the thing they wanted for their child come true in a form larger than they expected. They talked for 40 minutes. Then Mara started the car and drove home to the house that was now entirely and unencumbered hers. Mara Cole is, as of the time this story ends, 46 years old and the majority owner of a firm with a Charlotte expansion underway. She has Jerome Washington for the business matters. She has Renata running the operations. She has the house in Buckhead mortgage-free, which she has been refurnishing room by room with the specific unhurried attention of someone who is making a space entirely her own for the first time in nearly 2 decades. She has Carol on the phone on Sunday afternoons and sometimes on Tuesday evenings when something significant has been signed or filed. She has said that she does not feel victorious in the way that people sometimes expect her to feel when they hear the summary of the story. She said, "Victory implies a competition." She said, "I was not competing with Elliott. I was building something." She said, "He divorced me because he thought I had nothing." She said, "I had everything." She said, "I just had not needed anyone to know that yet." She paused. She said, "And I should have told him." She said both things. Both things are true. She holds them both, because they are both part of the accurate account of what happened, and she is the kind of person who insists on the accurate account, even when the accurate account is more complicated than the version that would be more satisfying. The thing she wants to be understood most clearly, the thing she has said most directly in the one account she has given, is not the settlement outcome or the disclosure or the Charlotte expansion or any of the specific facts of the legal process. It is this. She built Meridian Design Group because Carol told her to have something of her own, and because she understood that having something of your own requires not just the accumulation of it, but the correct structuring of it, the intentional maintenance of it, the protection of it from the specific vulnerability of a woman whose contribution can be made invisible by someone else's name being on the documents. Her mother had not gotten to keep what she built because the documents had Leonard's name on them. Mara built something with her own name on the ownership documents, in the place where ownership names go, where they are legally real without needing to be socially visible. It stayed hers. When the moment came that required it to be visible, it was visible. Completely, accurately, irrevocably. It does not have to be visible to be real. That is the lesson. It is also the answer. Leave me your answer in the comments below. Not about Elliott. Not about Ashley. About you. If you built something, a business, a financial position, a professional identity, anything that was yours in the specific, real, documented sense that the law recognizes, would you have told your partner? Would you have told them before the marriage? After the first year? After the first decade? Would you have found the conversation that Mara did not find? Or would you have done what Mara did, structured it correctly, maintained it carefully, and waited for the moment that required it to be visible? There is no wrong answer. There is only what you would have done in the specific life you are living, with the specific history you carry. Tell me in the comments. This channel runs on those conversations. I read every one. Mara Cole built 15 years of real professional achievement in the specific, quiet, correct way. She had 36 employees, a Charlotte expansion, and an 8-figure revenue base. She had a 73% ownership stake in a firm that had been, for 15 years, entirely and completely hers. And when Elliott Cole placed the divorce documents on the kitchen table and told her she could do this with dignity, she could. She did. She disclosed fully. She let the legal process produce the accurate outcome. She moved forward. There is something in this story about what it means to build something real and to wait for the moment when the real thing has to be recognized. And there is something in it about who Carol was in that kitchen in Macon in 1994, giving her 22-year-old daughter the most important professional instruction she would ever receive. Whatever you build, make sure it is yours. Mara made sure. Tell me in the comments, would you have done the same? Before we go any further into this incredible story, do me a favor. If you love stories about justice, betrayal, revenge, and unexpected plot twists, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, you do not want to miss what comes next on this channel. Drop a like on this video, it helps more than you think. And comment below where you are watching from, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Next week on Tales of Whisper, she discovered her husband had been sending money every single month for 12 years to a woman in another state. Not to a girlfriend, to a child. A 12-year-old child that he had been paying to keep away and the mother had been keeping, and nobody in either household had known that the other existed, until the month she found the bank statements. What she did next, who she called, what she said, and what the woman in the other state said back, is the story that proves the most significant conversations between women in this country happen in the spaces where men assume they are not talking to each other. Subscribe to Tales of Whisper. New stories every week, and they only go deeper from here.